Hey everyone, I'm a faculty member in the machine learning department and the computer science department at Carnegie Mellon University. And I'm presenting this work jointly done with Ivan Stelmach, Charvi Rastogi, Arti Singh, and Hel Daume. So as you can see, the title is indeed a mouthful, right? So what we'll do in this talk is we will together parse the title carefully. And that'll tell us everything you need to know about the study. All right, so let's start. Uh, this All right. So this study is done in a machine learning conference. Now, there is something important you should know about machine learning conferences and conferences in computer science more generally. So here, we review full papers, not just abstracts. Okay, so our conferences are very different from the peer review congress or other conferences in other fields. Moreover, these conferences are usually reputed to be at par with journals, sometimes rated better. And these are typically a terminal venue for publication. So loosely, you may think of computer science conferences as a synchronized journal review process. So now our focus is on one specific aspect of the peer review process in these conferences, and this is a reviewer-led discussion. So in these conferences, first, each reviewer for any paper submits their independent review. And after that, there is a period where there is a discussion between the reviewers. And this discussion happens over a forum with typed comments. So this will be our focus. And specifically, we are going to look at something called herding. So what's herding? So herding in general means that people are doing what others are doing rather than choosing the course of action based on information available to them. And this herding has been investigated quite a lot in the literature. And more closer to what we are looking at, herding has also been investigated in group discussions, where it's been found that the initiator of the group discussion had a disproportionate influence over the final conclusion or outcome of the group. Right? So this is often called the first advocacy effect, and many studies have investigated this in various other applications. So now, since our peer review also involves group discussions, the question that we ask is there herding in our peer review discussions? So in our peer review discussion, there's no specified policy on who initiates the discussion. So now if herding does exist, then it is problematic in peer review, right? Because the final decision will depend on who initiated the discussion, which is arbitrary. So as a caricature example, let's say there was one paper with two reviewers. One reviewer was negative, the other reviewer was positive about the paper. Now, if herding exists, and if the negative reviewer starts the discussion, maybe the reviewer will say, hey, I think this paper is below par. And the reviewer will say, fine, yeah, I won't oppose that. On the other hand, if the positive reviewer starts, then they say, hey, I vote for accepting this paper. And the other one says, yeah, fine, go ahead. Right? So if herding exists, it's problematic. So the question that we ask here is, conditioned on a set of reviewers who actively participate in the discussion for a paper, does the final decision depend on the order in which the reviewers join the discussion? That's the question we investigate. Now we do this via a randomized control trial. So this is done in a top machine learning conference called the International Conference on Machine Learning. And here we chose around 1,500 papers that were borderline after the initial reviews and had disagreements in the initial reviews. Now we split these papers uniformly at random into two conditions. The number of papers in the conditions turned out to be 750, 780. The mean initial score was very similar in the two. So the scores are all on a scale of 1 through 6. And the standard deviation was also similar. Okay. So none of these differences were statistically significant at a level of 0.05. All right. Now, with this split, we looked at the effect of positive reviewer-led discussion versus a negative reviewer-led discussion. How do we do that? So we did an intervention in our discussion process. In one condition, what we did was we identified the most positive reviewer based on their initial scores and asked them to initiate the discussion. Then later, we asked the most negative reviewer to contribute to the discussion. In the second condition, we did the opposite. We first asked the most negative reviewer to initiate the discussion, and later we asked the most positive reviewer to contribute to the discussion. Yeah. So now we see that in the condition where the most positive reviewer initiated the discussion, the mean score of the initiating reviewer was about 4. Okay, this is again on a scale of 1 through 6. In the negative initiated condition, the mean initial score was 2.7. Okay, so there was a statistically significant difference in the initiators' initial scores. Now we have this statistic as well as various other statistics in our full paper, which suggests that our intervention was indeed successful. So now in order to measure its effect, we looked at the acceptance rate of the papers in the two conditions. So if herding does exist in the manner that I had described, then in the condition where the most positive reviewer initiates, you might expect a higher acceptance rate than in the other condition. So let's see, did that happen? Turns out it didn't. The acceptance rate in the two conditions were not statistically significantly different. Yeah. And we looked at some other statistics as well. Few of them are shown here, others are in the paper, and there was no real difference in them as well. So overall, through our intervention, we did achieve an imbalance in the opinions of the discussion initiators. However, there was no difference in the acceptance rates, and hence we did not find evidence of herding in our peer review discussions. So the full paper is available on arXiv. And by the way, in computer science and machine learning, there's a lot of research on developing algorithms and running experiments that's kind of disjoint from this community. So if you're interested, you can look at this link. With that, I'll stop here, and I'm really excited to have discussions about discussions. Thank you.
And thank you for, I didn't have to use my nasty signs. I finished early. So let's open it up to questions. How about, we'll start back
Okay.
here.
Hello, Pei-Ling Wang from University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Yeah, I like your research.
Thank you.
Are you going to continue?
Thank you very much.
No, are you going to? No, I think if you're going to do the follow-up, I was thinking as a researcher also, because you have two reviewers, right? So you have a split scores and accept all. So if you have 3 reviewers, what the results might be? Okay, that's one question.
Sorry, so just
Second, I have 2 questions.
Yes.
Second question is, have you looked at the nature of these 2 reviewers? You assign them to randomly who is initiating the dialogue. So seniority or more prestigious or male and female, DEI, whatever.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. Thank you very much for your questions. So the 2 reviewer thing was a caricature. So if each paper had either 3 or 4 reviewers, and what we did was we identified the most positive and then most negative. So, but the discussions happened between 3 or 4 reviewers in total. Now to your second question, no, we haven't looked at the demographics or identities of the initiators, etc. And that's something interesting we could do. Yeah, thank you.
Take a question from this mic.
Thank you for this great presentation, Mario Malichki from Stanford. Can we explain a little bit of the discipline differences? So when reviewers submit their reviews, they do this independently, and then they go into discussion. But is the reviewers themselves who decide will the paper be accepted, or what is the purpose of the discussion? Is there an editor who then decides based on the review reports and the discussions what gets accepted, or do they choose based on this discussion what gets accepted?
Yeah, Great. Thank you for the great question. So the way it works is first the reviewers will submit their independent reviews, and then the authors get a chance to look at the reviews. So authors can respond to the reviews, promise some revisions, etc. Now, when this comes in, then all of the reviewers can see each other's reviews, the author's responses, and then the discussion happens. Now, this discussion takes place under the aegis of what's called a meta reviewer, which is equivalent to an associate editor. The purpose of this discussion is to look at each other's point of view and hopefully try to come to a decision or consensus about the outcome of the paper. So the final decision is made based on both the reviews and the discussions.
And the reason why I asked this is why don't they discuss after they write the review and write a consensus report as it's done in grant reviews, rather than have the discussion after the reviewers responded to their individual questions? Could they have agreed before they got the answers on the
So there is a consensus report which is written in the end. It's called a meta review in my community. But yeah, the workflow is that, if I understood your question correctly, the workflow is that they look at the author's responses, and after that they discuss. So this is how these venues operate.
Anna?
Okay, yeah, thanks. Anna Marušić, University of Split, Croatia. Thank you. It's nice to see experimental research. You know, we studied grant review, which you cannot do experimental research, but just observe. And there you also see this, what we call regression to the mean, when you have extremes and when they meet together for a consensus report, you know, you find somewhere in the middle. And here you studied the positive and negative reviewers. Maybe you can also look at other factors like seniority, which was mentioned, and the language that was used in these discussions, because they can also affect not only what they say, whether something was good or bad, but also all other things that are around this, you know, gray and not black and white decisions that finally they end up with. So
Yeah, absolutely.
thanks.
I fully agree with you. Like in these discussions, there are certainly other aspects that can also come into play, like the seniority and others. Here we wanted to investigate the specific aspect of just the ordering of initiators. But yes, what you're saying
Yeah,
is absolutely
maybe it would be interesting to study language.
language as well. Yes.
There, yeah.
Yes.
Michael, do we have any virtual questions?
Yes, Jack Andrews from the University of Missouri wonders if the reviewer participants were aware of that they were participating in the study or the aims of the study, because doing so may have made them more likely to actively resist herding.
Yeah, great question. No, they were not aware of it. Yeah, nobody was, like, except for the researchers.
Any other virtual questions? If not,
No.
okay, we'll go take
Sure.
this mic.
Thank you. First, a thank you. Steve Schenkel, University of Maryland. A thank you for one siloed in the health sciences. To hear of another way of doing things is truly a pleasure. The way this was structured, you demonstrated what seems like a clear difference in rating, and yet no difference in ultimate outcome. And I think whether it's reviewing papers, reviewing applicants, we've all seen the herding effect or pile-on in action. And yet something in these groups managed to presumably protect against it from a divergent initial opinion, but not affecting the outcome. I'm gonna ask you to speculate what qualities were either in the people in the group in the process that allowed a consistent outcome despite the suggestion of a divergent beginning.
Yeah. So what I think, and this is supported by other studies in other places, is that what people have found is that just the mean of the reviewer's initial scores is the best predictor of the outcome. So it's possible that the initiator is, in these group discussions, the initiator is not necessarily dominating, but initiators and others are just trying to converge to a consensus or to a mean.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How?
Hal Sox, Pecori. It seemed to me that the interpretation of your study depends on the two groups of studies were actually equal. And maybe you mentioned it and I just wasn't listening, but did you randomly assign them to the two groups?
That's correct. So they were randomly assigned to the two groups. and we measured various statistics like the mean overall initial score, the standard deviation, etc. And none of them are statistically significantly different in the two groups.
Great, thanks. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jayashree. I'm author community lead at Cactus. Thank you for the really engaging presentation. One thing that struck me was the fact that you painted a very vivid picture of this entire decision-making process. I speak to authors a lot and I speak for authors a lot. And to me, it felt like, here's a bunch of people discussing the fate of a researcher's paper and the researcher is waiting for a jury's verdict. And we are trying to control or influence by asking positive or negative reviewers to speak first. So to what extent is the author losing power here? Does the author have any influence, or is it just based on a person's positive or negative perception of a paper? Doesn't that make the author a little more powerless? Have we considered that? Have you heard from authors about this approach? What did people who are submitting their research in this pilot say?
Yeah, so this was, well, in an actual conference, not a pilot, but like the authors, the control that they have in all of these venues is that once they get initial reviews, they can submit a response and promise revisions, etc. So that's what they have in the standard workflow. Now, in the standard workflow, there's no specified policy on who initiates the discussion. And that was the point that we were interested in, because here the authors have no control, nobody has control, it's arbitrary. And so this could lead to arbitrariness or unfairness. And so we were investigating whether this actually influences the decision or not. And turns out we couldn't find any evidence of it doing that.
Steve?
Hi, Steve Goodman, Stanford. So fantastic presentation. I think we should randomize the talks between you giving other people's talks and them giving their own talk.
Thank you.
So I wonder if this might be specific to the specific mode of discussion, because it's flattened. It's like having competing text messages. And that takes out a lot of issues in power dynamics and things that have been found in small group processes where various aspects of personalities and power can have tremendous effect. So to what extent is this limited to this kind of exchange, which again really eliminates many of those factors, maybe in a very positive way?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And some of the prior work I cited, they do find in controlled experiments that these kinds of herding effects in face-to-face discussions are much more as compared to in typed forums. So we are already in typed forums, which gives us an advantage of mitigating this first advocacy effect. Right now, if we somehow transform these venues to face-to-face, maybe we'll see herding. I don't know, because in prior literature, it's been found to be higher in face-to-face.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kirsten Patrick, Canadian Medical Association Journal. Thanks for your presentation. It was really enlightening. A question, but just two reflections to support the question. So we do single blind peer review, and one of the things that we do is that we, when we send the decision letter to the author, the peer reviews appear and all the peer reviewers are BCC'd. And we often get people say, it was really great to see the other peer review comments, right? And then I was thinking, are we doing peer review wrong by making people do it in the silo of their own brain? And what's your thought about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. In our conferences, people can see each other's reviews because at least informally, I think, I don't know of a study or a survey, but informally, I think there's a feeling that people do learn something from each other's reviews. So I personally, as a reviewer, prefer this mode. Yeah, that's all I can say.
And we are at 2:50. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much.
Time for refreshments. Thank you very